Through the morning tomorrow. Some brighter skies across other parts of southern England and Wales. Thicker cloud though for northern England and Wales, and this bringing some outbreaks of rain even into parts of southern Scotland. Sunnier skies though for Northern Ireland and the rest of Scotland, albeit towards the far northwest, towards the Outer Hebrides. Here some thicker cloud could also be bringing some outbreaks of rain first thing tomorrow morning. Otherwise, as we go through the day, the thicker cloud across some northern areas should break up a little bit, so some brightness breaking through here, and elsewhere there will be some decent sunny spells, but also a few showers to watch out for. They should be generally fairly hit and miss in nature, so many of us will avoid them. Do watch out for some heavier ones across parts of Scotland. Temperatures likely to be a little bit higher than today for many of us, a low 20s quite widely, so feeling pretty warm in any sunshine. Into the weekend and on Saturday, watch out for some hefty showery rain spreading its way across southern parts. Elsewhere there could be a few showers to watch out for, but they don't look like they'll be as frequent or as intense. Perhaps fewer showers on Sunday, but still the chance of some, especially towards the south. Then Monday's looking mostly fine. See you later.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Gary King. In Kent, coastbound M2 has delays after an earlier accident between Junction 4 at Gillingham and Junction 5 at Sittingbourne. In Hampshire, the westbound M27, there's a lane closed and delays after a breakdown between Junction 7 at Hedge End and Junction 5 at Southampton Airport. Westbound M4 in Berkshire, very slow at the moment after an earlier accident between Junction 10 at Wokingham and 11 at Reading. And in the West Midlands, the northbound M6 looking busy after an earlier breakdown. It's between Junction 5 at Castle Bromwich and Junction 6 at Spaghetti Junction. And in Staffordshire, the eastbound M54, there's a lane closed and delays at the moment due to recovery work. Follows an accident between Junction 2 at Wolverhampton and Junction 1 at Cannock. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
You really could be our next big winner with an incredible £20,000 in tax-free cash to play with this summer. What would you spend that on? Well, whilst you're thinking about it, listen to some of our previous winners getting that winning phone call from us.
I'm Charles. I'm on £18,000 cash. It was just amazing, and as soon as it goes into your bank account, it just changed. It's a life-changing thing. Just go for it. It's an absolute must. You must try and go for it.
The next winning call could be answered by you. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good evening. A big launch today from Keir Starmer, a 6-point plan. Is he just aping Tony Blair? But then again, is he Blair without the flair? We're joined by World War II veteran tonight, live in the studio, Dorothea Barron, as we help a fundraising campaign to get people over to Normandy on the 6th of June for the 80th anniversary of the landings. And joining me on Talking Pints tonight, well, he's a face that you've seen on television for decades. He's always got a crack, he's always smiling. I'm looking forward to Talking Pints with Roy Walker. But before all of that, let's get the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Nigel, thank you. The top stories from the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer has told GB News there'll be no tax cuts under a Labour government until the economy is back on the path to growth. The Labour leader says that while he wants to keep the tax burden as low as possible, he also wants to ensure that living standards improve. He said British people deserve to know that future generations will enjoy better opportunities, but that can only be achieved with tangible steps.
Wherever we have said we will raise taxes, we've set out what we'll raise and what we'll spend the money on. So what you did hear this morning is that we're going to get rid of the tax break for private schools and use that money for the teachers we need in our state secondary schools. What you did hear is that we're going to get rid of the non-dom status properly and use that money towards reducing waiting lists. The tax burden on people is as high as it's ever been under this government. This has been the tax-rising government of all time.
In other news, around 16,000 households in Devon have been told to boil their water before drinking for another week after a parasite was found in a key reservoir. The UK Health Security Agency says 22 people are confirmed to have become sick, and as many as 70 other cases of diarrhoea and vomiting are under investigation. The Tory MP for South Tutness and South Devon criticised South West Water for what he said was slow and poor communication. The company has apologised for the outbreak and has offered £100 of compensation to those affected. Lawyers for Donald Trump painted his former fixer as someone who celebrated the former president's legal troubles as the hush money trial continues today. The court was played audio clips of Michael Cohen saying the case fills him with delight and that he felt giddy with hope and laughter imagining Mr. Trump in prison. The former president faces 34 counts of falsifying business records in relation to a payment to a former adult film star. He denies any wrongdoing. And hospital mortuaries in England allowed bodies of deceased patients to decompose because of a shortage of freezers, inspectors have found. The Human Tissue Authority told how inadequate storage facilities at some NHS trusts and lack of freezer space means some bodies have been left for too long at unsuitable temperatures. Official HTA guidance says bodies should be moved into frozen storage after 30 days in fridges or before, depending on the condition of the body. However, a series of reports show NHS trusts are not always adhering to those rules. The hospitals criticised in the reports following the inspections in 2022 and last year said systems have since been improved. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Nigel.
Good evening. Well, today a big speech from Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the opposition Labour Party. And what did he tell us today? Well, he told us that he would stick to tough spending rules in order to give us economic stability. He'd set up Great British Energy, a publicly owned clean power energy company. He'd cut NHS waiting lists by providing 40,000 more appointments each week, funded apparently by tackling tax avoidance and non-dom loopholes. He'd launch a border security command to stop the gangs arranging small boat crossings, and he'd provide another 6,500 neighbourhood police officers to reduce antisocial behaviour. And there'd be new penalties for offenders. I'll tell you what's interesting about those 6 pledges. There is absolutely nothing new there at all. And this idea that somehow you remove tax breaks, as they're seen, for private schools, and that gives you the money to recruit an extra 6,500 teachers. It's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. Yet everybody in politics and the media keeps asking the question, how will you pay for it? And you would think literally that we take tax off one thing and give it directly to another. We don't. It's all baloney. Actually, all the money, whether it's tax, whatever form of tax it is, national insurance, all goes into a central pot. We don't have what is known as hypothecation of taxes. And anyway, we don't run balanced budgets either. So that bit of it I find insufferable, but don't worry, Rishi Sunak does exactly the same thing. He sat down after the speech with GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, and the first question that Chris asked was about tax.
Wherever we have said we will raise taxes, we've set out what we'll raise and what we'll spend the money on. So what you did hear this morning is that we're going to get rid of the tax break for private schools and use that money for the teachers we need in our state secondary schools. What you did hear is we're going to get rid of the non-dom status properly and use that money towards reducing waiting lists. The tax burden on people is as high as it's ever been under this government. This has been the tax rising government of all time.
And then Chris Hope asked him, well, who do you support? Where's your consistency? What do you really stand for?
Your opponent, the Prime Minister, said on Monday that you're someone who backed Jeremy Corbyn in 2019, a left-wing politician. Now you're backing Natalie Elphicke, a right-wing politician. What do you stand for? Do you stand for anything? Are you that desperate to get into power? You'll back all these different people from different parts of the political view.
Well, I would gently remind the Prime Minister that Jeremy Corbyn will not stand as a Labour candidate at the next election. This is a changed Labour.
You backed him in 19.
He is not able to say the same about his predecessor, who smashed the economy, and working people are paying the price. If he was serious about the future, he would ensure that Liz Truss wasn't a candidate at the next election, but he's too weak to do that. So I've led from the front. I've changed my party. This is a party back in the service of working people. What we are now seeking, humbly seeking, is the opportunity to change the country and put the country back in the service of working people.
And are you the heir to Tony Blair?
Well, look, ever since I've been Labour leader, people have tried to sort of box me into being a previous Labour leader. Tony Blair was a fantastic leader. He won 3 elections.
Well, of course he's like Tony Blair. He's aping Tony Blair in absolutely every way. It was Blair back in 97 that came up with the 5-point pledge card. Compare and contrast the pictures of Blair with Starmer. There's Starmer today, walking around the stage very much as Blair would have done. Do you notice the shirt? The rolled-up shirt? And there's Tony Blair with his pledge card. So that's very, very similar. And have a look at this sleeves rolled-up image. That's Keir Starmer today. Let's go back to 1997. Oh, there's Tony Blair, and it's absolutely identical. Now, look, there is an argument that if you find a winning formula, you keep using it. But I just put this to you, folks. This is Blair without the flair. This is Blair. This is almost a charisma-free zone. But crucially, does this win your vote? Farage at gbnews.com. I'm joined by Paul Richards, former Labour Special Advisor under Blair and Gordon Brown. I'll tell you the big difference, Paul, between Tony Blair and Sir Keir Starmer. I didn't see any optimism there today. I mean, literally no optimism. I didn't see any vision. Blair was terribly good, wasn't he, at selling a vision of where we were going to go and why the journey was worth it. None of that.
Well, here's the original pledge card.
Aha, hold it up for the camera.
There it is. There it is. I carry it in my wallet, close to my heart.
You've kept it every day.
For 30 years. And if you look at the pledges, they're very mild, they're very modest. Yeah. There wasn't a great vision in here. It was quite mechanistic, quite low level, achievable, which is what Starmer has learned. And the retail offer is there as a demonstration for bigger purpose, but it isn't big, bold stuff. The national minimum wage isn't even on this card.
I understand your point. That what Blair was doing there was saying, vote Labour, we won't put your taxes up. And that was a very important message to middle class.
Indeed.
But here's the difference. Neither are Starmer's 6 pledges particularly inspiring, and he's also playing very safe. The difference is in delivery. The difference is in energy. And Blair had bags of energy.
Well, again, you're retrofitting this a little bit. Don't you remember they called him Bambi at the time? He was untested. He was supposed to be this weak, fawn-like character. You know, he was called all kinds of rude names. The Danger line, the New Labour New Danger, I remember it vividly. So
well, that was a Tory attempt.
There wasn't a halo around his head, you know, back in the mid-90s.
Things can only get better, and people dancing, and this was all...
And they did. But, you know, it was only afterwards. Afterwards, more people said they voted Labour than could possibly have actually voted Labour. There was a whole sort of post-event nationalisation.
I heard him speak. I watched him turn up in the European...
Well, funnily enough, so did I.
You know, in the European Parliament, he turned up. There was a hostile crowd.
And he wowed them.
It was extraordinary.
Yes, he was good at that.
Really good at that.
But these are changed times. I mean, to your point, you know, we have a terribly difficult economic situation. There's wars raging across the globe. The climate is in a different situation than it would have been for Tony. I mean, Tony, it was a sort of pre-digital age.
It was.
You know, one of his big pledges was connecting schools to the information superhighway. And that was an applause line. We all had to applaud. And we didn't know what it meant. We all had to applaud.
And we're now trying to reduce their access to it in many areas.
Exactly. So a very changed time.
OK, look, I completely accept that we're, you know, decades on, things are different. Blair inherited a very good economy in many ways, and that's not the case. It's slightly better than it was a few weeks ago by the looks of it, but it's not great.
Yeah.
And I understand all of that. What I'm talking about is leadership quality and to inspire people and to bring them on the journey with you. And my impression, Paul Richards, and maybe you're going to tell me I'm wrong, my impression is when the pollsters say they're going to vote for Starmer's Labour, they're almost doing it because they don't want to vote Conservative as opposed to really want to vote Labour.
Well, even Blair only got about a fifth of Conservative switchers from 92 to 97 to actually vote Labour. A lot of them sat on their hands. Some of them voted for your predecessor parties and so on. So it wasn't a massive, the whole country suddenly became Labour. Even in 97, Starmer is a tough leader. You made the point there about him kicking out Corbyn, quite right too. He reshaped the Labour Party.
He's done well with that, I agree with you.
Now, I think the argument then is if you can reshape the Labour Party and reform and modernise that, then you have permission to be heard on whether you can do it to the country. And that's what these pledges today are all about. And some of them are quite big. I mean, a British energy company to bring our bills down, that's quite a big deal, big bit of state intervention in a way. I don't think Tony would have done that, by the way. That wouldn't have appeared on the card.
There's no way that Blair would have done that. But on the economy, you know, it's the economy stupid. The economy, how people feel, really matters at every general election.
Indeed.
It's very interesting when I saw the budget from Jeremy Hunt, and I watched Rachel Reeves' response, and basically she agreed with 100% of it. There are almost no economic differences now.
Well, again,
almost none.
Gordon came in 97 pledging the same spending as the Tories for 3 whole years. The first 3 years of the Labour, the revolution, the new Labour revolution, was funded by the same funding as the Tories would have had. And then once you've earned the right to be heard, you can establish yourself. Gordon said, I'm a prudent Chancellor, then you can start spending on the National Health Service and you can win another election. But Labour's horror is to be coming to an election, everyone says you're going to put our taxes up and to lose the election, or to mismanage the economy like Callaghan did, for example, and be booted out for incompetence. So it's got to be steady as she goes. It's got to be prudence, and it's got to be maybe not exciting.
No,
but
it's not.
We've got a long journey, and I mean, you know, I'm a pessimist. I mean, Labour is still awfully long way behind anywhere near government. The majority the Tories have is still huge.
They've got to win lots of seats, that's true.
Lots, and weird in like Basingstoke, places like this that have never been Labour.
But when John Curtis, who comes on this programme and this channel, Sir John, he's the sort of the doyen.
Yes, but he's not a soothsayer, is he? He's analysing data now. He's not seeing into the future.
That is true, but with this difference. The one thing neither you or I or anybody would ever call John Curtis is rash. He's not.
No.
He's very measured, very sensible, and yes, he always explains that a poll is a snapshot of today.
Yes, yes.
He's put his neck on the line and said it's 99% certain that Starmer finishes up in Downing Street.
Is anything 99% certain in politics? I mean,
well, according to John Curtis, it is.
Look at all the polls that have predicted things wrongly over the last 20 years. You know, all I'm saying is that Labour has a huge mountain to go, which is why the pledge card that is the real one done today, you know, is just another step in that journey. And why you may say it's modest, but actually it's starting to address some of those issues that people care about, like crime, antisocial behaviour, like their bills. You know, this is the stuff, as you say, of the meat and drink of politics. Yep. And as a campaigner, you'll also know you need retail offer on the doorstep, something you can say in 20 seconds.
Yeah,
You're not going to get a philosophical debate, but you might get across a policy that lodges that may turn a vote. So that's what that's about.
Do you feel, Paul, that what Starmer's done today is to set the parameters for the next 6 months? Or are we going to see big change to those 6? Big new ideas coming in?
No, I mean, this is now locked down.
This
is the mantra. Every campaigner is now going to have to memorise and repeat for the next few months. Now, in government, it may be different, because, again, the point they've made today is the national minimum wage is not on this pledge card. A big change that made a big difference to a lot of people wasn't even on the card, and yet they did it in government. So you will see in government, I think, big reforms. But for now, I'm afraid it's those 6 things again and again and again.
I suspect, Paul Richards, that you're right. That's it for the next 6 months, folks. You can go to sleep and wake up for election
and we
day.
think November, right, Nigel? Do you think November?
I think October, probably. I don't think they'll want... The American elections are such a huge global event. We can't pretend that our elections are anything like a par with that.
No.
I think they want to get out of the way before, but... I might have a bet on that, you never know. Paul, thank you very much indeed. Now, Patrick Christys has been with Suella Braverman up in Cambridge, going to look at protesters. Patrick, what happened?
Yes, well, it's some quite astonishing footage, actually, Nigel, that I'll be bringing to our viewers between 9 and 11 p.m. this evening. Suella Braverman is a former Cambridge graduate herself. There's one of the many protests that are taking place, student protests taking place at Cambridge. We decided to present them with a woman that they hate, really, a woman that they make TikTok videos about, a woman that they can't stop slagging off to each other and publicly. We decided, OK, well, here we go. Here is Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary. There's a short clip, a little teaser clip for you.
I'm not here to get into a fight. I'm not here to debate necessarily. I'm coming with a sincere intention to engage. But it is quite surprising that the college authorities have allowed this kind of occupation to take place.
What would be your main question to some of the individuals?
I'm really keen to hear what your message is to Israel.
You're going to have to tune in to find out how these young radicals respond, Nigel. These people at the beating heart of the student revolution and student politics at the moment. Suella Braverman also joins us live in the studio from 10 p.m. for even more reaction. It's a massive show tonight, 9 till 11.
Well, Patrick, I'll be home by then with a glass of something. I will watch it. Thank you very much indeed. In a moment, we're going to talk. I said to you we were going to be pushing very, very hard up to the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. And today, we're going to be supporting a charity that is raising money to send people to that extraordinary, probably last big get-together ever of veterans for the 80th anniversary. And I'll be joined by Dorothea Barron, World War II veteran herself.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christys Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
More than 21,000 asylum seekers have gone missing in Britain over the past 5 years. The real number, by the way, will be much, much higher. The fact is, they've legged it. They're on the run and they're out committing goodness only knows what kind of crimes. But that's not the official line. Do you want to know what the official line is?
So do we now know what's happened to the remainders who have no legal basis on which to still be in the United Kingdom?
The Home Office, through our different mechanisms of tracing people, are continuing to seek to trace them.
So when people do disengage, and I think that's a more accurate word than gone missing, when people do disengage from us, we respond to that.
They've not disengaged, Mr. Cleverly. The vast majority of them had their claims rejected and then ran off because we're not deporting them quickly and they're not going to just sit there and wait for you to come and get them in a few years' time. If they don't turn up for an interview twice, they change their phone number, they don't fill in a questionnaire twice, they move address, or they change their lawyer without informing the Home Office. That's it. Is it any wonder, though, when you've got these civil service chuckle brothers running the show behind the scenes?
Put foreign offenders aside and Albanians aside, just forget about those numbers. How many people travelling on small boats that's been refused asylum have been sent to a third country or back to their own country over the past 3 years?
I don't think we have. I
think we'll write to the committee with those numbers, Mr. Anderson.
That's staggering. That's actually
Okay,
then let's do it for the last year.
I don't have a number for non-Albanian, non-FNOs.
Perhaps they might be able to help you.
Let's do last week then.
Do we have any figures about anything?
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, I've been telling you all week that we would, as a channel and this show, be pushing very, very hard up to the 6th of June commemorations, the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And it's come to my attention that there are World War II veterans who would very much like to go to Normandy to take part in that commemoration, who simply haven't got the money to do it. And sadly, the British government doesn't help with things like this. Well, one man who's done an awful lot for World War II veterans is entrepreneur Johnny Gallagher. Johnny, you've raised money, you've given money yourself over the past to help World War II veteran charities. Now, this time, this is the taxi charity for military veterans, and those cab drivers will give of their time freely. But actually, to get people over there with carers, it's expensive, isn't it?
Well, I found out today one of the people, Don, he's in a bad way at the minute, and he might even have to get an ambulance over there, so it's very expensive.
Yeah.
And obviously we don't know how many are going to make it, and there's people now that have seen the cause and more people want to join. So my goal is to raise £100,000, and like you said, I've always put my hand in my pocket.
Yes.
And because of some circumstances and things which I've mentioned in raising funds about how the veterans feel people have forgotten about them, for me, it's important for everybody, to, even if it's £1, £5, to donate and get these people back.
Well, absolutely. And if you look at your screens now, folks, you will see the QR code, and you'll also see the taxi charity for military veterans. You can go online, you can donate directly to their website, you can actually download the QR code on your phone, and actually, we want to help as many people as possible who want to go back for that big anniversary. Well, I'm very pleased to be joined by Dorothea Barron. Dorothea, welcome.
Hello.
To the programme. Now, you're still a youngster. You haven't quite yet made your 100th birthday, have you?
No, it'll be in October.
Right. Well, I hope it'll be a very good party. Now, you were a Wren.
Yes.
During the war, serving on HMS Phoenicia. And
no, not serving on.
Oh, no, but
it was just a code name for anybody in the Wrens.
What was interesting about D-Day was I learnt that you were teaching people how to use semaphore, because they were going into a battle situation, radio communications, telephone lines get cut. And I bet a lot of our viewers don't know what semaphore actually is. So explain.
Do I look at you or do I...
Just look at me, please, yes.
You?
Yes, yes.
Yes. It's a means of communication using two... oh, good heavens.
Flags, basically.
Flags
yeah.
in your hands.
Yep.
I think this was I think. Right. I can't remember now. And you'd be doing things like this, and you'd always have another Wren beside you writing down the letters you were reading. You weren't actually putting them together in your head. You were just reading them. And we did semaphore in daylight, and sometimes on a sunny day we'd be in this bright sunlight trying to read, and also we were doing Morse code and trying to read a little flashing light in bright sunlight was very bad for the eyes, which is why my eyes aren't very good at the moment.
No, well, I mean, I'm afraid that was a price that you paid for what you did.
Willingly.
Willingly.
Yes.
And no, I mean, clearly we were sending people into a very dangerous battle situation on the ground, and the more training they had, the more skills they had.
And, of course, any other method of communication could be intercepted.
Yes, and I've got here the 1937 signal card, which I'm sure you memorised cover to cover.
I did at the time.
There are all the flags there for those that are watching. When D-Day happened, you know, and you learnt the first news within 24, 48 hours, what was the feeling in the country? Was it a feeling that this really was going to be?
Well, I was travelling down from Scotland because that's where we have been signalling and working with the D-Day people who were also going to take soldiers off the boats, the big liners, and convey them to the smaller craft, which then took them to the beach.
Yeah. And did you feel optimistic at that point of the war?
I don't think there'd been a turning point. The turning point, of course, was going in.
Yeah, no remarkable
Going
stuff.
into France. Then we felt it.
We're on our way.
Yes, we're coming in, we're getting back. And we've driven you out. Well, we haven't let you come into England.
You've still got the fighting spirit, haven't you?
Oh, I sure. 99.
I love it. I love it.
As Johnny will tell
I know, I can tell. I wouldn't argue with you, I promise. And your husband had a long...
Oh, well, Andrew was in the RAF.
Yes.
And he actually wasn't there at D-Day.
No.
But he was, first of all, in Coastal Command, which became amalgamated with Bomber Command.
Yes.
And he was very much into bombing railway lines in Germany and factories so that they couldn't send more supplies to fight us and to fight...
Yeah. And you're wearing his miniatures.
Oh, I've got his miniatures
proudly
here.
displayed along with your own. Well, Dorothea, I have to say, Johnny, I mean, wow. You know, I know the numbers of Dorothea's are thinning out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What got you, as a guy in his 20s, so keen to help these people?
Yeah, I mean, so my granddad was very close to me. My parents got divorced when I was young, so my granddad was a real role model in my life. And then my great-granddad was in the Battle of Somme.
Yep.
He survived, but his brother didn't. I still actually have the original letter that my great-great-grandma got to say he passed away. He was only 21. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it really inspired me to do well in business. I've been very lucky to do well in business at a young age, and that fighting spirit of not giving up. You know, I got so much inspiration from that generation. And then, you know, fortunately, I'm still growing my business. I'm still not where I want to be, but I got a phone call near Christmas 2 years ago, and they told me that these veterans... I'd never helped veterans before at this stage.
Yeah.
They said, oh, you know, Johnny, these veterans' Christmas lunch is going to be cancelled. And I was like, there's no words, you know? And look, I'm not super wealthy, and it was a lot of money, but at the
it's time we helped. Johnny, Johnny's done his bit. It's time the rest of us helped. I can tell you, Dorothea, that just in the few minutes that we've been chatting, and I put the website up on the screen and showed people where to donate, just in the last few minutes, £8,000 has already come in. Wow. Just in the space of a few minutes. And that's because we are honouring your generation, Dorothea, and we realise that if we get in trouble again, you're fit and ready to serve once more. Of that, I've got absolutely no doubt. Thank you for coming on the programme.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. And may I say that the taxi drivers, the London taxi drivers, are very good to the cause, aren't they, Johnny?
Unbelievable. They got you here today, safe and sound.
Good for them. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Great. We're doing our bit. £8,000 in the first few minutes. Can't be bad. Now 10,000. There we are. Wow, it's moving. Incredible. Dorothea, we're going to have you back. There's no question about it. In a moment, we're going to be talking debanking once again, the issue that I raised, of course, last year. It's still happening, in many ways getting worse. Lots of people are losing their bank accounts, and without that, it's tough to survive in the modern world. All of that after the break.
Good evening. It's time for your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. There will be a few showers around tomorrow, but also some decent warm sunshine. Before that, a largely dry night ahead once the heavy rain that is affecting central parts at the moment clears away towards the west. The low pressure driving the rain is making its way westwards across the UK, and as it clears away, it will take the worst of the heavy rain with it. So for many, it is going to turn largely dry overnight, although across some parts of North Wales, northern England, perhaps into southern Scotland, there'll be some thicker cloud here, and that cloud could bring some outbreaks of rain. Elsewhere, there will be some clear skies, but temperatures not dropping a huge amount, most places holding up in double digits. We do need to watch out for some mist and fog first thing, particularly in the southeast. I am expecting a few patches to develop overnight, but they should largely clear quite quickly as we go through the morning tomorrow. Some brighter skies across other parts of southern England and Wales. Thicker cloud, though, for northern England and Wales, and this bringing some outbreaks of rain even into parts of southern Scotland. Sunnier skies, though, for Northern Ireland and the rest of Scotland, albeit towards the far northwest, towards the Outer Hebrides. Here, some thicker cloud could also be bringing some outbreaks of rain first thing tomorrow morning. Otherwise, as we go through the day, the thicker cloud across some northern areas should break up a little bit, so some brightness breaking through here, and elsewhere there will be some decent sunny spells, but also a few showers to watch out for. They should be generally fairly hit and miss in nature, so many of us will avoid them. Do watch out for some heavier ones across parts of Scotland. Temperatures likely to be a little bit higher than today for many of us, a low 20s quite widely, so feeling pretty warm in any sunshine. Into the weekend, and on Saturday, watch out for some hefty showery rain spreading its way across southern parts. Elsewhere, there could be a few showers to watch out for, but they don't look like they'll be as frequent or as intense. Perhaps fewer showers on Sunday, but still the chance of some, especially towards the south. Then Monday's looking mostly fine. See you later.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It'll never go away. Debanking will never go away. I'm convinced till the day I die there will be debanking stories. I wish that wasn't the case. It just seems that things just aren't getting any better. Well, the Institute of Economic Affairs have produced a report today. I'm joined by Dr. Jamie White, Senior Research Fellow. And you've been looking, Jamie, in particular at money laundering, the money laundering regulations. Now, all this stuff, I think we've had 4 major waves of legislation on money laundering. The last lot, and this is important, came in 2017. It was agreed as members of the European Union. It was brought in after the Brexit vote. From what I can understand, nothing has been done to change it.
No, nothing has been done, and I think you're right, nothing probably will be done. I mean, one of the sad things about my job is you write these things and you think, well, I'm pretty sure I'm right here, but also pretty sure nothing will happen. I mean, the origins of all this are not the European Union, though it has all been done through it in the end. It's actually a G7, it was set up by the G7 in 1989. It's called FATFA, the Financial Action Task Force. And they issue all these recommendations about how to fight financial crime. And basically, the European Union and Britain are following its recommendations. And its recommendations are basically that a legal obligation be placed on banks that they must act effectively as a police force to detect and identify financial crime, and in particular money laundering. Now, if they don't, if they fail to live up to the expectations of the Financial Conduct Authority in Britain, they face fines in the billions.
Yeah.
Now, this means that a customer who's on the face of it may be a little dodgy, which requires nothing more than the fact that you deposit cash.
Or one odd payment or whatever, yeah.
Or have dealings with certain foreign countries. They might be completely legitimate dealings, but that gives a kind of red flag. And then the bank, it could investigate it to find out if you really are a financial criminal or not.
But that costs a fortune.
It costs a lot of money, and your account might not be worth very much. So the economic logic from the bank's point of view is shut the account down. Because if they do that, they're in the clear. If they don't do that, they're running a huge risk. So I put it in an article I've written on this. Imagine that the government placed on everybody an obligation to detect if their friends were criminals. Because you know your friends quite well, you're in a good position to do it, aren't you? And if you don't do it up to scratch, we'll fine you £100,000. What would happen? Well, I'd get rid of all my friends who I was absolutely sure were legit, right? And that's exactly the logic of this situation.
It is crazy. And one of the stats that I've given the viewers here at GB News is that for every £1 that is recovered, money laundering that is recovered in the UK system, the compliance cost is £100. And you've produced a stat today that I hadn't seen, that for every one conviction for money laundering, 169 accounts.
Right.
So how many? Just bring us up to speed on numbers.
OK. So the number of... A study was done following your scandal, looking into account closures, what causes them, how many are there, and so on. Well, the number of closures in the last year for which data is available, 2022, was 343,000 accounts were closed. Now, sometimes there's nothing in it. They're just dormant accounts and nobody's using them. But in half of the cases, roughly, it's because the bank couldn't satisfy itself that you weren't involved in financial crime. So it's 170,000 accounts. There are about 1,000 convictions for money laundering. So you've got 170,000 people being punished.
Yeah.
Effectively, they're being punished.
Yeah.
Only 1,000 are actually found guilty.
And it's so bad for small business particularly, isn't it?
Well, it hits small business because of the economic logic I pointed out. If you're a big business, it's worth it to the bank to sort it out because your account is worth a lot to them. If you're a small business, your account's not worth much. It's not worth their while to sort it out.
It is. We've had promises, Jamie. I've had personal promises from the government, even the FCA, not that I think much of them, have made promises. Are we any nearer change?
Not that I can see, and the reason I'm doubtful is because the change that's required is to lighten the regulatory burden on the banks. Can you imagine a politician today saying, I'm about to lighten the regulatory burden on banks?
Because
they want to bash banks.
Because they'll say that's what caused the crash in 2008, and even though it's not actually technically quite true. But there's a new Labour government coming in, possibly. Perhaps they'll sort it all out for us.
Yes, I would love to think that that's true. I mean, there's a tiny chance. I mean, for example, this does hit the little guy much harder than the big guy. And the Labour Party is supposed to care about the little guy.
Well, I tell you what, Jamie, let's keep
not hold our breath.
That point, but not hold our breath. Thank you very much indeed. What the Farage moment? Well, how many times have I criticised the COVID inquiry? It doesn't end until the end of 2026. As I've said many times before, I reckon absolutely nobody will be held to account at all. But some new figures out today telling us that the inquiry is costing the taxpayer, it's a revised figure, this, £300,000 a day. £300,000 a day for a talking shop that hasn't as yet addressed any of the serious, tough issues that is going on for years. Folks, it's what's called a whitewash. Quick bit of political news. 6 months after the election in the Netherlands, they finally formed a government. Geert Wilders, who topped the poll, will not be the Prime Minister. It'll be a coalition of 3, maybe even 4 parties. But it's taken them 6 months to get to this position. And I remember in 2010, when it took about 5 or 6 days to form the coalition, most British press thought it was the end of the world. Sometimes life operates quite well without any government at all. In a moment, Talking Pints, and my guest, well, he's a face you'll recognise, a voice you've heard. He's been around British television for absolutely decades, always with a joke, always with a smile. In a moment, Roy Walker joins me on Talking Pints.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Have government done enough, do you think, to actually help them out?
I think there will be occasions where people have tried to run a venture, whether it be a pub, a restaurant or anything sort of like that, in the hospitality sector, and it hasn't become commercially viable because of costs, because of bad accounting or because of bad business people. That is just a fact of life. That happens in every sector. So there will be pubs that are closing because they've been poorly run. But I do think there will be occasions where people are forced out of the market. So if local councils aren't being able to pass on business rates, for example, maybe central government can do more. It always tries to do more to cut beer duty and things like that to keep pubs going. So I don't think it's necessarily just as plain as what James is saying, is that, you know, bad pubs will just inevitably be falling by the wayside.
The idea that you two gentlemen, you raging capitalists, support the government stepping in to protect pubs seems to me to be particularly peculiar. If a pub isn't commercially viable, it has to be allowed to fail.
Well, Sadiq Khan, you know, he has a nighttime czar that he pays well over 100 grand.
Yes.
And businesses are going under like you wouldn't believe in London.
She's a real nightmare.
What's your point?
Well, the point is that Labour aren't exactly helping out these businesses, are they? So
I'm saying that pubs should not be protected by the state. I'm all for a pub.
But I'm not suggesting that we subsidise pubs.
Well, that has been suggested. That's what James May is railing against. Although I have to say, it's all very well for James May and presumably his very posh gastropub. But if a pub is not fit for purpose, and May makes this point, you know, you've got to have decent, clean loos and a clean pub. And also, realistically, in this day and age, you know, times change, you've got to put on some decent grub as well if you want it to survive. We can't have the government stepping in to save our pubs. And anyway, my understanding over the last 10, 20 years, as a percentage, we haven't lost that many pubs, so they're not going under anytime soon.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News. The
People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Catchphrase was an enormous television show and, of course, its host, the man that dominated the whole thing. Before I introduce him on Talking Pints, let's have a look at a clip of him in action.
Say what you see, and you're about to see Mr. Catchphrase himself, Roy Walker!
And good evening and welcome to Catchphrase. Catch the money, catch the prizes, catch the holidays. I'll never forget the holiday I was on last year. The sun, the sand, the dancing. I was dancing with this very, very young lady and all her friends were all around. They were all clapping and I was kipping it all this year, you know. I said, do your friends think I'm in the groove? And she said, yes. They all think you've got one foot in it.
Roy, welcome to Talking Pints.
Cheers. Thank you for inviting me on the programme.
Now, I'm not sure what to call you. By the way, not rude names, obviously, but do I call you TV presenter? Do I call you singer? Do I call you comedian?
Well, a lot of us started off as dance band singers. Manning was, Mike Reid was, Tom O'Connor was, and then jokes became very, very popular. So we met this fella called Johnny Hamp. And you couldn't get on the programme in the 70s unless you told jokes.
Yeah. And you've been telling jokes...
Ever since.
Ever since.
Yeah.
And do you
55 years, yeah.
But the trouble is, I've got friends who friends are comedians, and they all say comedy's getting harder and harder and harder. There are so many areas that you just can't tell jokes about anymore.
Well, of course, there's all that follows on as everything changes. Like music, you know, Swiftie, I mean, she'll earn more money this week than what Frank Sinatra earned in a lifetime. Yeah. And we don't know one song she sings, you know, but her fans do. Comedy moves on, and I always think that the comedians today would have been us if they had been born when we were born, and we would be them if we were born when they were born.
OK, so we adapt to the times, and our humour adapts with it, basically.
Yeah, you want to be a comedian.
Yeah.
You know, you have to move with the times.
Now, you know, Roy, growing up in Belfast, post-war Belfast, not a lot of money around.
No, no one had any money. You know, it was, we were known... I was a war baby. My mother surrendered, and you know, everybody was in the same boat. You didn't know had anything to measure it with, who was doing well, who wasn't, you know?
But you were out there, aged 11, trying to earn money, trying to do things. And I read that there was an inspirational figure in your life, a Mr. Corbett at school, who introduced you to...
Yeah, the science teacher, yeah.
Yeah, and so suddenly you were introduced to acting, you were introduced to comedy.
Yeah, and a little bit of magic and singing. And I got a real buzz from doing it. And I thought, you never know. So when I was 14, I was like a chorister in the cathedral. And then I was sort of discovered by a British choir that was passing through and went off with them. And I was on the Palladium when I was 14.
Wow.
You know, I was out of work when I was 15, waiting for an apprenticeship in the shipyard, where your voice changes. You know?
Yes, of course. And I guess the shipyards was the traditional route for people in Belfast.
They say 30,000 people there. Although, if you ask some of the people that owned it, they'd say only half of them worked.
Well, these days they wouldn't turn up at all. They'd work from home,
probably,
wouldn't they?
Yeah, probably.
And then 7 years in the army, right?
Yes. Well, I was national service, and then I discovered athletics. I never did any sport at school, and I discovered athletics, and I became the Northern Ireland hammer throwing champion and what have you.
The Northern Ireland hammer throwing champion.
Yes, we didn't have guns in them days.
So you were obviously a very fit young man.
I was a PTI and what have you, and then I enjoyed it, and then I got married and had children and what have you, and decided I didn't want to be abroad. I'd been in the jungle for a year in Borneo, and I decided that I'd come out of the army and maybe go back into show business.
But I just spent 3 weeks in the jungle last time round, and that was long enough for me.
Yeah, that was long enough for anybody.
Long enough for me. And kind of, you know, you marry Jean, and you come from different religious communities.
Yes.
And that was called a mixed marriage in those days.
Yes, she was a woman, and but we got along fine and what have you. And then, of course, the word got out that was the way we were, and then the guys come around and what have you. Well, I never really talked too much about that there, because there was so many people had far worse done to them than what I had. Yeah. I lost my shop, I lost my house, I lost my car, but I didn't lose my wife and kids.
Yeah.
So we headed to England.
You were driven out?
Yeah. They call it ethnic cleansing. I think it's a very posh word for it. But I didn't mind. I was young. I was in my 20s and what have you. I'd just come out of Borneo. You've been 3 weeks in the jungle. You know, it didn't seem like it was such a terrible thing.
Well, but the Troubles were pretty awful, weren't they?
They were, for most people, they were horrible, horrible. You couldn't believe that things like that would happen. Yeah. But anyway, I got away and I had a tiny little bit of talent. I was welcomed into the northeast of England, which was clubland.
The friendliest part of England.
It's wonderful. Yeah. They were so kind to me and tolerant. Some of the clubs were really, really difficult. But the worst thing about comedy is you can't learn unless you're doing badly.
Yeah. You
have to be dying.
I think, actually, that applies to most of life, doesn't it? We learn through our mistakes, and if we don't learn through our mistakes, we don't get anywhere.
You fall back.
And then, stunning success on New Faces.
I was very lucky in getting in a New Faces. I met someone, Pat Mooney, you call him. He had been on New Faces. He was on the Comedians and what have you. And he told me to write to and I found a great manager like the Brian Epstein of comedy. His name was Mike Hughes, and he had Freddie Starr and Russ Sabat and people like that, and Ken Goodwin, do you remember him?
Yeah.
And they all became big names, you know. I was very old, I was like 45, and he still took me on, and lucky, got a break.
Well, it works, and you go on to catchphrase, vast audiences,
amazing.
Lots of money.
Do you know, he said something which John K. Cooper came to see Russ Abbott, and I had a great night in the show at BIC in Bournemouth. And he said, Roy's very good. He said, we haven't seen him on television for a long time. And Mike said, why didn't you give him a go at that game show that you got? And he said, oh, he's too slow and too quiet, you know? And Mike said the magic words, yeah, think of the money he'll save you.
Well, that may have been the case to start with, but you did very, very well.
It was the easiest thing I ever did.
Was it?
You know, a game show host. Some people can do the presenting and some people can't.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, we're still trying here, Jacob, aren't we? But we're doing our best.
Yeah. The only thing is you leave your comedy behind. They don't want you to be the comedian, you know, like Bob Monkhouse and Tarby and all them. So it was becoming old-fashioned to tell jokes on game shows. They wanted to get into the money and the visitors and the prizes.
Yeah, I want jokes personally. Well, look, you know, most of our viewers will know catchphrase, but some won't. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little reenactment is what we're going to do. And we're not stitching you up, Roy. I absolutely
Which
promise.
one of you two is going to be Mr. Chips?
So I am going to put up 3 pictures here. Now, this is catchphrase. We're looking for political catchphrases, and we're not being unfair on Roy. Jacob is here as the backstop, and you're not in competition with each other. You're a team, and I will give some clues. So can we please have our first image? Right, now, Roy, what we're seeing here is a TV handset, remote, being handed from one person to somebody else who is grabbing it. Any thoughts?
Remote control.
Control is part of the political slogan.
OK.
Control is part... If you think back to the referendum, what was one of the big phrases in the referendum about control? Jacob?
It's take back control.
Take back control. There we are. Teamwork. Teamwork. Very, very good.
Well
remember, say what you see. Say what you see. Very, very important. Say what you see. Right, let's have our second image, please. OK, now, this refers to a phrase from a Prime Minister not that long ago. And you can see strength here. Strength.
Yeah, he's Arnold Schwarzenegger, sort of poser.
Strength and it was, well, I'll give you a clue. It was Theresa May talked about being strong and, can you remember? No, she's not very memorable, really, is she?
I'm glad I didn't say that.
No. Jacob, of course, was a huge supporter of Theresa May. What is this image telling?
This is strong and stable.
Strong and stable, number 2. Very good indeed. Right, now we now have the last image. Now, this goes back, this image. Let's have a look, please. This image goes back to the speaker.
U-turn? No.
Yes, you're very, very... Yes, it's about turning...
No U-turn.
No, the lady's not for turning. Well done, Roy. Very good indeed. Excellent.
Smart Mrs. Thatcher, that was.
Exactly. Well, I think you did remarkably well there, I have to say. And Jacob, jolly helpful as well. Roy, what an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme.
It's great. Great to meet you and what have you.
And you must just love doing television.
I've been lucky enough to get into television and what have you. Love to do the comedians and love comedy. Yeah. You're lucky to find a profession that you love. Yeah. If you can do that, you know, life is so much easier.
Someone once said to me that if you find a job that you love, it's not work.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, you're always smiling. I can't think of an image of you when you've not been smiling. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Jacob.
Well, that was absolutely fascinating. And what an insight into Northern Ireland just a few decades ago, that you couldn't have
a marriage between a Catholic and an Anglican.
And you know, Roy talks about that, but it's so recent, really, isn't it? And you think how awful it was for so many people. Jacob, what have you got coming up this evening?
What have I got coming up? We're going to be talking about Sir Keir Starmer's speech and his 6 points and the enormous excitement.
But don't send them to sleep, for goodness sake.
Keir Starmer stirring up apathy across the country. I mean, really.
Well, we had a former Tony Blair advisor on earlier, and he said that's it. Those 6 points, that's what you'll hear between now and October or November.
Well, we did something recently on repetition because it turns out nobody knows anything about our current politicians, so they have to keep on saying it again and again in the hope of getting anything through.
Yeah, well, they're not like those TV stars of yesteryear, are they, with all that personality? Nothing like it. I'm off. Let's have a look at the weather with Alex Deakin.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. It's time for your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. There will be a few showers around tomorrow, but also some decent warm sunshine. Before that, a largely dry night ahead once the heavy rain that is affecting central parts at the moment clears away towards the west. The low pressure driving the rain is making its way westwards across the UK, and as it clears away, it will take the worst of the heavy rain with it. So for many, it is going to turn largely dry overnight, although across some parts of North Wales, northern England, perhaps into southern Scotland, there'll be some thicker cloud here, and that cloud could bring some outbreaks of rain. Elsewhere, there will be some clear skies, but temperatures not dropping a huge amount, most places holding up in double digits. We do need to watch out for some mist and fog first thing, particularly in the southeast. I am expecting a few patches to develop overnight, but they should largely clear quite quickly as we go through the morning tomorrow. Some brighter skies across other parts of southern England and Wales. Thicker cloud, though, for northern England and Wales, and this bringing some outbreaks of rain even into parts of southern Scotland. Sunnier skies, though, for Northern Ireland and the rest of Scotland, albeit towards the far northwest, towards the Outer Hebrides. Here, some thicker cloud could also be bringing some outbreaks of rain first thing tomorrow morning. Otherwise, as we go through the day, the thicker cloud across some northern areas should break up a little bit, so some brightness breaking through here, and elsewhere there will be some decent sunny spells, but also a few showers to watch out for. They should be generally fairly hit and miss in nature, so many of us will avoid them. Do watch out for some heavier ones across parts of Scotland. Temperatures likely to be a little bit higher than today for many of us, a low 20s quite widely, so feeling pretty warm in any sunshine. Into the weekend and on Saturday, watch out for some hefty showery rain spreading its way across southern parts. Elsewhere, there could be a few showers to watch out for, but they don't look like they'll be as frequent or as intense. Perhaps fewer showers on Sunday, but still the chance of some, especially towards the south. Then Monday's looking mostly fine. See you later.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest cash prize so far. A totally terrific £20,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer spectacular. You could use that cash to splash out on a holiday, make the garden glam, buy a new car, or just save it for a rainy day. Whatever you'd spend £20,000 on, make sure you don't miss the chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Andrew Pearce. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. It's coats and ties off and sleeves rolled up for Sir Keir Starmer as he sets out Labour's 6 pledges to the nation. But once again, this is another chapter in Labour's book of non-plans. Everything from migration to taxes and education to the NHS. This is a classic case of style over substance. The COVID inquiry is costing you, the taxpayer, £300,000 a day, and it's now projected to reach a total bill of £200 million. Is the inquiry serving any useful purpose? Is it too expensive and looking at the wrong problems? While the government delayed the ban on new petrol and diesel cars to 2035, there remains in place a surreptitious net zero tax that could pass on £15,000 per car onto you, the consumer. It must be scrapped. Plus, as one of Thames Water's directors resigns, I'll be calling for the utility firm to be allowed to fail, so its irresponsible directors, shareholders and bondholders can feel the consequences of their decisions. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most intellectual panel this evening, GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and the journalist and Conservative peer, Lord Goodman. As you know, as always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's what you've all been waiting for, the News Bulletin with Tatiana Sanchez.
Jacob, thank you. The top stories this hour. Sir Keir Starmer has told GB News there'll be no tax cuts under a Labour government until the economy is back on the path to growth. The Labour leader says that while he wants to keep the tax burden as low as possible, he also wants to ensure that living standards improve. He said British people deserve to know that future generations will enjoy better opportunities, but that can only be achieved with tangible steps.
Wherever we have said we will raise taxes, we've set out what we'll raise and what we'll spend the money on. So what you did hear this morning is that we're going to get rid of the tax break for private schools and use that money for the teachers we need in our state secondary schools. What you did hear is that we're going to get rid of the non-dom status properly and use that money towards reducing waiting lists. The tax burden on people is as high as it's ever been under this government. This has been the tax rising government of all time.
In other news, around 16,000 households in Devon have been told to boil their water before drinking it for another week after a parasite was found in a key reservoir. The UK Health Security Agency says 22 people are confirmed to have become sick, and as many as 70 other cases of diarrhoea and vomiting are under investigation. The Tory MP for Totnes and South Devon criticised South West Water for what he said was slow and poor communication. The company has apologised for the outbreak and has offered £100 of compensation to those affected. Hospital mortuaries in England allowed bodies of deceased patients to decompose because of a shortage of freezers, inspectors have found. The Human Tissue Authority told how inadequate storage facilities at some NHS trusts and lack of freezer space means some bodies have been left for too long at unsuitable temperatures. Official HTA guidance says bodies should be moved into frozen storage after 30 days, in fridges or before, depending on the condition of the body. The hospitals criticised in the reports following inspections in 2022 and last year said systems have since been improved. And teenagers could be recruited to help plug a shortage of train drivers under new proposals put forward today. The government is asking for views on lowering the minimum age for drivers from 20 to 18, which it says would help build resilience across the railway. The average age of a driver is 48 and the workforce is projected to shrink over the coming years, with many due to retire. It's hoped the proposal will set thousands of young people on track to a career in transport. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Jacob.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Sir Keir Starmer set out the Labour Party's pitch to the people today with 6 key pledges. Despite the delivery of a man with a plan, the plan itself leaves an aftertaste of repetition and bland déjà vu, delivering economic stability with tough spending rules so we can grow our economy and keep taxes, inflation and mortgages as low as possible.
Economic stability. Now, this is the very foundation of economic growth. Tough spending rules, yes, to keep inflation, taxes and mortgages low. Because if you lose control of the economy, it's working people who will pay the price. Stability is change, and that's why it has to be our first step.
It all sounds rather similar to its predecessor in Tony Blair's 1997 manifesto. The priority must be stable, low-inflation conditions for long-term growth. By spending wisely and taxing fairly, government can help tackle the problems. Another of Sir Keir's flagship pledges is to tackle the other most pressing issue facing Britain today, stopping the boats, by launching a new border security command with new specialist investigators and using counter-terror powers to smash the criminal boat gangs. As brilliantly highlighted by The Spectator's James Heal, there is very little deviation from the bits of the current Conservative government's plans that haven't actually worked. In the absence of an alternative to Rwanda, there are no real plans to cut migration numbers. Ending the scourge of people trafficking is of vital importance from both an economic and moral point of view. But this is not a separate issue to the unsustainable levels of immigration, to which Labour has provided no new solution. To tackle the cost of living, Sir Keir pledges to set up Great British Energy, a publicly owned clean power company paid for by a windfall tax on oil and gas gains. The problem here is the same as ever with Labour policy. It is a short-term solution. A windfall tax is a one-off bill on energy profits, which does not provide a sustainable source of funding for a publicly owned provider, and therefore cannot hold any guarantee of working in the long term. As the late, great Baroness Thatcher put it,
socialist governments traditionally do make a financial mess. They always run out of other people's money. It's quite a characteristic of them.
They always run out of other people's money. Those words should be engraved in stone across the country, perhaps on an headstone of repute. Along with Blair-esque pledges to tackle antisocial behaviour, education style blueprints for 6,500 new teachers paid for through taxing private schools, the primary takeaway from Sir Keir's proclamation to the people is the clear-cut absence of originality, radicality, ambition and vision. However, it's clear that the Labour leader is taking notes from a Labour election winner, Sir Tony Blair, rather than the most drastic of losers, his old boss, one Mr Jeremy Corbyn. It's also worth noting that while offering a watered-down version of Blairism, Sir Keir just this week met and negotiated with trade union barons, with reports claiming he has already been pressurised into scrapping certain plans following these meetings. What Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party seems to be offering is a diluted rehash of Blairism and recent Tory policy, while taking refuge in the pockets of trade union bosses. As ever, let me know your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.com. I'm very pleased to be joined now by an old friend of the programme, the PR tycoon and former Labour councillor, Kevin Craig. Kevin, first of all, you can be bothered to dress properly before speaking to an audience. Why does he dress like a hobo?
You were lying down in Parliament with your slippers on. It went viral.
I didn't have my slippers on.
You might as well have done. You might have had a pipe out.
But
at
he
the
couldn't be bothered to put a tie on.
You are in.
Is this very cool and trendy?
You are in no position to lecture people on standards when you were in your gym jams with your dispatch box.
Is this a new cool and trendy Keir Starmer?
Hang on. I tell you, I'm not sure I would have come, Jacob, if I'd have known how to sit through that at the start, OK? So I was there today when Keir Starmer gave his speech.
Did you fall asleep?
I thought it was... I found it very moving, very hopeful. Some of the other speakers there today included, which your monologue didn't mention to people, the chief executive of Boots, saying that he, a friend of David Cameron, welcomes the proposals being put forward by Labour. And with all due respect, you know, and I want to really sort of, you know, always stay polite with you. It's very rich, some of the things you just said there, when your party, you've been in charge for 14 years. Growth is... honestly, Jacob, I can't come again if you don't let me speak, because I will. Right? But the economy, your friend Liz Truss, cost the families that I've been speaking to in Ipswich and Suffolk Central across recent weeks hundreds of pounds. And with all due respect, the British public don't think you're in a position to lecture us.
Well, we're here to discuss Labour Party policy.
Indeed.
And it's fine for you to make party political points about things that have happened in the past. Of course it is, and we could go back to...
Well, you started it.
Of course I did. We could go back to the economic legacy that we had in 2010 when the country was bust and there was no money left. But I think that's boring for voters, because what we want to talk about, I hope, is what the Labour Party is promising.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think this is a stupid electoral strategy, but they're not promising very much, are they? That's very cautious.
Listen,
it's very...
Jacob, have you read this today yet? Had a
I've
chance?
seen this, yes.
OK, so this is a summary, because we know you're busy, OK? These are the first steps. But these are to give a flavour to the British people, who, by the way...
Kevin, this is motherhood and apple pie.
They've lost...
Who doesn't want to deliver economic stability?
Right.
Who doesn't want to cut NHS waiting times? Who doesn't want to launch a new border security command? That's all happening.
You failed.
Hang
on. Now, listen, I watched you earlier today, I think it was, with Mr Farage, right?
Yes.
Now, I know it was, you know, almost Shakespearean, you know, the affection there is between you both. He reminded us that between 1066 and 2010, OK, your guys and girls have let more people in illegally than in that period.
Not illegally, legally, actually.
Yeah. So legal, right.
But
so you haven't got a grip.
Hold your horses.
You haven't got a grip.
The bulk of that migration was prior to 2019, before we'd left the European Union, because the Labour government would not apply the restraints to people coming from Eastern Europe, as you know perfectly well.
He told you...
I'm well aware of what he said.
The 2 years
but the idea,
when you've been in charge, the last 2 years, and we can't duck around that.
So
one of the things that was really good, honestly, just to say, a new border security command. I loved it today. The people with special forces, military experience in the police who are endorsing Keir's plan is really heartening, because people do care about this.
You can always find people to endorse your plans. It's really a question of whether there is any
plan. We didn't under Jeremy Corbyn, Jacob, I tell you. I was at the lunch for business supporters after the Jeremy Corbyn defeat. It was a poor afternoon.
Right, so you were supporting Jeremy Corbyn before?
The Labour Party of my life, yeah.
OK, so you were supporting Jeremy Corbyn, now you're supporting Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer supported Jeremy Corbyn, didn't he?
Liz Truss was your girl,
well,
right?
I supported Boris Johnson.
Are you actually a Conservative still? Why don't you join Reform?
I am, but this isn't about me, this is about the Labour Party. Let's have a clip of what Keir Starmer said to Christopher Hope about immigration.
Number 3, launch a new border security command. You're not saying stop the boat.
Nobody but nobody should be making that journey across the Channel in a small boat. I think that we can smash the vile gangs that are running this trade, that are making a fortune putting people into boats, gimmicks such as Rwanda, which cost a fortune and removes less than 1% of those arriving by a small boat, is not going to work. And I want to tackle a very real problem with a serious response.
This is exactly what the government has been trying, and this hasn't actually worked, because without a deterrent for people to come, all the command and control, all the money given to the French, all the extra resources hasn't stopped people coming, and there's no plan to stop the boats.
The Conservative government which you personify.
No, tell me about Labour policy.
I'm going to tell you
You're
Labour
always
policy.
trying to tell me why you don't like the Conservatives.
I will tell you Labour policy.
But you've got no defence of Labour policy.
I have huge defence. I was about to explain precisely that, right? Labour policy is to work with our European partners and move resources. Let me finish, because this is really relevant. Move resources into new officials, big recruitment to deal with the criminal gangs. And we did not. How could we work with our European partners when your friend Liz Truss said, the French, friend or foe? Are you having a laugh?
We've been working very closely with the French. We've been giving tens of millions of pounds to the French. The Belgians and the Dutch have been cooperating in stopping the small boats, actually rather more effectively than the French. This has all been happening.
Well, I would...
So without Rwanda,
disagree.
How do you stop them? What is the policy?
Rwanda. What is Rwanda other than a gimmick? More of you and your colleagues have been in asylum seekers.
What's your alternative to Rwanda?
It's what Keir set out today.
This is already being done. There's nothing new in that.
The government has not deployed the resources, the money and the focus. And Keir Starmer's made a career out of tackling serious criminals. That's what he did.
Well, defending them as well from time to time. Perfectly reasonable thing for a lawyer to do. But he didn't just attack them.
When he was a civil servant at the CPS...
He prosecuted more journalists than were being prosecuted in Iran at the time. He loved prosecuting journalists.
You can't have a ding-dong with me about being political when you do that sort of thing. I'm just telling you that the man was made a knight by the Queen for his services at the CPS, cracking on crime. And I, who grew up surrounded by crime on a South London council estate, can't wait. I really hope he gets a chance to show the British people...
The issue here that we haven't managed to get to is that Labour is, for sensible electoral reasons, being very cautious and not actually announcing proper policies.
This is inspiring. This is inspiring.
This wouldn't inspire the lettuce that outlasted Liz Truss.
But you have to say that, Jacob. Because
there's nothing in it.
But you've been in government, and people are not listening.
But Kevin, I think this is unlike you. What I don't understand is why you don't admit that this is, in fact, the intelligent electoral strategy. You're ahead in the polls. Why give hostages to fortune?
Also, we haven't got the books. We haven't got sight of the books. The economy.
That's what Harold Wilson said.
No,
that's back to the 1960s.
All in there. And I tell you, we need hope in this country.
Kevin, it's taken us back to the 1960s, but it's always a pleasure to have him on the programme. Coming up, can you guess how much the COVID inquiry is costing you every day? And for what? Plus, are petrol cars the newest endangered species?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Between 1955 and 1989, an average of 55 nuclear tests were conducted across the globe each year. More than 30,000 young British and Commonwealth servicemen served at British test locations in Australia and the Pacific Ocean. But in the years since, those who were involved say they've been ignored and lied to about their exposure to radiation. For decades, Lab Rats International has represented the millions across the world exposed to fallout from the testing programmes and the families who still suffer today from illness and deformities. Last year, the government unveiled the Nuclear Test Medal, recognising the military, civilian and overseas staff and personnel who participated in Britain's nuclear testing programme in the 1950s. But for Lab Rats founder Alan Owen, whose own father was a nuclear test veteran, the work is only just beginning. In September, they launched a legal challenge to the Ministry of Defence to provide the test veterans full medical records, which they say they've been denied access to.
We sit in this bubble as the nuclear test veteran community, fighting against the establishment. And they will say, ministers will go in Parliament and say, all you've got to do is apply for your medical records and they'll give them to you. It just doesn't happen. It's not a reality. They're not there to as easy, as accessible as just applying. They will fight you all the way. They will delay it.
In response, a government spokesperson said, "We are grateful to all service personnel who participated in the British nuclear testing programme, which is why we have formally recognised them with an official medal. Nuclear test veterans who believe they have suffered ill health due to service have the existing and long-standing right to apply for no-fault compensation under the War Pensions Scheme." The fight for these veterans and their families lives on, because thousands who came before never got the recognition and justice for their service.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Friday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Lee Anderson's Real World at 7. At 8, it's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Well, we've been talking about Starmer and the Labour Party and its extraordinarily exciting six-point plan. And Mary says, Starmer is not Blair, Mark II, because he's so bland and boring. Starmer is more Miliband II. Buyers beware. Bob says, if the private schools are forced to close, the children will go to state schools. That will cause more costs, which will probably be more than the extra tax raised. Just the usual smoke and mirrors from Starmer. Well, Bob, I think you're absolutely right on that. I think they haven't worked out the cost revenue properly. And Robert says, the only part of Starmer today that I believe is that they won't lower taxes. Yes, I fear that's likely to be the truth. The COVID inquiry is getting out of control in both cost and timescale. It's now on track to become the most expensive inquiry in history, with the daily costs reaching an average of £300,000 the last year, and that's of your money. It's now projected to cost a total of £200 million. Would not be a surprise if we were to set up a post-inquiry inquiry into why it costs so much, pointlessly to pontificate about whether we locked down early enough. But it was practically doomed from the start because its terms of reference too broad and seemingly missed the most fundamental question of all: were lockdowns necessary or proportionate? Well, I'm joined now by my most intellectual panel, GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the journalist and Conservative peer Lord Goodman. Nigel, £300,000 a day. I mean, this is a self-sucking lollipop for the lawyers, isn't it?
Well, except that, I mean, public inquiries are expensive. So, I mean, the Savile inquiry was, 185 million, although that did go on for 12 years. We hope this one won't go on for quite so long. This is probably the biggest event in all our lives. And it seems right to me to hold a proper public inquiry. Don't do it on the cheap. Make it wide-ranging, come up with the answers we need to.
But other countries have done their inquiries much faster and come out with the basic recommendations. Shouldn't we be learning from that? Because by the time this inquiry is reported, it will have lost its impact.
Well, we'll get the first report towards the end of the year. And there'll be other reports till the final one in 2026, which is about right. The whole point is to learn lessons from this, that all we were using the same mitigations they've been using for the last 700 years, right at the beginning, until the vaccine came along. So it's social distancing, lockdowns, masks, quarantine for travellers, yes. An Italian word from the Black Death. It goes back a long way. So we have to find out if we can do this sort of thing better, should this come at us again.
But you see, this is what worries me, that better seems to be to lock down earlier, whereas actually lockdown caused as many problems as it solved, and it was a terrible failure to differentiate, doing enormous damage to children who didn't need to be locked down in the first place.
Well, you're on your point about lockdown, and there are arguments either way. I mean, I'd like to pick up what Nigel just said about trying to learn lessons to make things better, which I think what you should be trying to do, whether you think there was too much lockdown or too little, my query about it is the same as yours. If you want an inquiry to find out how to do things better, why can't you do what Sweden did and have an inquiry that lasts, I think it was 2 years in Sweden's case? Nice and shorter. Lessons learned inquiry. If you want a kind of circus that's looking at who was to blame, do that afterwards and take a long time over it, if you think that's necessary.
It doesn't really matter who was to blame, that people were dealing with something they'd never come across before and were doing their best. inevitably
I don't know
mistakes.
how you can possibly say that. I mean, we love inquiries about who was to blame. The Iraqi inquiry was about, I mean, just correct me if I'm wrong, it's about the third or fourth into Iraq. It's part of the way we seem to do things here. We're a centralised country, the media and MPs mix in Westminster, we're very London-focused, and we have this culture that likes blame.
But Iraq was a specific decision made by a government, whereas COVID was something that hit the world. And inevitably, when it first hit, people didn't know, for example, that ventilators weren't going to be particularly useful.
Well, I wonder if that's a bit of argumentation. Of course, Iraq is a specific war and COVID is a specific event. But, hey, government's got to make decisions about both. So you end up with these inquiries.
So perhaps we should narrow the number of inquiries that we have, reduce them. Now, the Bloody Sunday inquiry was different because that was needed for part of the peace process, for reconciliation. We had an inquiry into the global financial crisis, which was done by joint Lords and Commons committee, chaired by Andrew, now Lord Tyree, with the Archbishop of Canterbury on it. It did its work very quickly. It came up with some proposals for reforming banking, looking to the future. Wasn't that a rather better model than this very heavily lawyered approach?
Well, I mean, it depends which way you think is best to do the inquiry. Lady Hallett thought this was the best way of doing it. It goes further than things like lockdowns and so on, because we're talking about bereaved families want to know what happened to their loved ones, whether the restrictions on them was necessary in the first place. So it is so wide-ranging. It's not just about lessons learned. It's about actually giving some kind of closure to people who lost people.
I just wonder whether if you give these things to judges to do, they will always involve lots and lots of lawyers, because that's what judges do. And if it isn't the best way of getting to the truth.
Well, the counter-argument, I suppose, is that MPs are too partisan to do inquiries properly. I don't agree with that. I think it's a shame if you're going to take the process of inquiry away from Westminster, as it'll give MPs even less to do on a cross-party basis, and is likely to make them even more partisan.
Well, it's a pity we didn't learn from Tyree, because Tyree did the first major parliamentary inquiry, I think, since the Marconi inquiry, because that had been politicised for obvious reasons, and that bringing it back to admittedly a political inquiry, but one of cross-party consent and eminence seemed to me a much cheaper and better way of doing something that is of its nature political.
Depends who's doing it. I mean, most of your viewers won't know or have heard of Andrew Tyree, but he's a pretty depoliticised, in the best sense of the word, dry, impartial figure, and I've no doubt he did his inquiry very well.
Well, thank you very much to my panel. Now, we're joined earlier than usual by the great Patrick Christys, who has spent today in Cambridge with our former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman.
Not here to get into a fight. I'm not here to debate necessarily. I'm coming with a sincere intention to engage. But it is quite surprising that the college authorities have allowed this kind of occupation to take place.
What would be your main question to some of the individuals?
I'm really keen to hear what your message is to Israel.
Well, the two of them have been visiting the pro-Palestine encampment that has sprung up at the university and trying to find out just what these protesters want. And I'm joined now by Patrick himself. Patrick, this must have been a fascinating visit. How did the pinko students, bearded, sandal-wearing, cope with our one and only forthright, clear-thinking Suella?
Well, it's a really, really fascinating interaction, actually, because Suella Braverman is probably public enemy number one to these people, all right? Not just for this, but also for her backing and pushing of a much tougher Rwanda plan than the one we've got now. These are the kind of people that make TikTok videos about her, slamming her. So we thought, as a channel, all right, then, we will present you with the woman that you absolutely hate. This is your opportunity as young, hardcore revolutionaries to have it out, to have a say, to make this your moment. You are going to have to tune in between 9 to 11 to find out exactly what happened. But Suella Braverman and I spent about half an hour walking up and down, not one, but two encampments there at Cambridge University. She wanted, genuinely, to know some answers to some very serious questions. What are your demands? What do you think about Israel? What would you say to Hamas? All of this stuff, just asking very basic questions to them. Can I just say as well, no top politician, she is a top politician, no top politician and no other real serious news outlet wants to go and have this kind of direct interaction with these protesters, and it is very revealing.
Yeah, well, and I bet they saw how charming Suella is, because she is an incredibly decent, good person, and talking to her privately, her great charm comes across, and I hope that came across to some of the students.
Yeah, what is absolutely, well, quite hilarious, actually, is they don't know how to handle her, all right? Because all of this toxicity, all of this, you know, kind of student echo chamber shouting and all of this stuff that goes on, all right? When they are confronted with the reality of someone and given an opportunity to talk to that person, well, all I'll say is I don't think they covered themselves in glory, Jacob.
Well, people must definitely tune into that, and thank you, Patrick. Coming up, are petrol cars about to go the way of the dodo? Plus, is it time to let Thames Water go bust?
Good evening. It's time for your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. There will be a few showers around tomorrow, but also some decent warm sunshine. Before that, a largely dry night ahead once the heavy rain that is affecting central parts at the moment clears away towards the west. The low pressure driving the rain is making its way westwards across the UK, and as it clears away, it will take the worst of the heavy rain with it. So for many, it is going to turn largely dry overnight, although across some parts of North Wales, northern England, perhaps into southern Scotland, there'll be some thicker cloud here, and that cloud could bring some outbreaks of rain. Elsewhere, there will be some clear skies, but temperatures not dropping a huge amount, most places holding up in double digits. We do need to watch out for some mist and fog first thing, particularly in the southeast. I am expecting a few patches to develop overnight, but they should largely clear quite quickly as we go through the morning tomorrow. Some brighter skies